morning, everybody, and welcome to our Pulp Literature Friday live reading for June 26th. It's a beautiful June day here in the BC Lower Mainland, and I hear it is in the other parts of the world where our guests are from. So today we have Jeanette Topar, Jakob Drud, and Brenda Carre, who will be reading for you. Out there in the audience, if you have questions, please type them up into the YouTube chat. And we have Mel backstage who is going to read them over to me. And I keep forgetting to say this. I am your host, Jen Landels. I forget that my face is not on the screen. And so I forget that people don't know who I am. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Our first reading today is going to be Jeanette Topar. So Jeanette is a New York City-based writer whose short stories have been published in many prestigious literary journals. Her work was shortlisted for the 2018 Editor's Prize by Meridian Journal from the University of Virginia. She was the winner of the 2017 Hummingbird Flash Fiction Prize, and her short story Just Down the Hall came out in issue 17, which you see up on the screen here. She enjoys writing 100-word stories, and you can read her favorite efforts online. I'll put those links up on the website and on her blog. So welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so happy to be here, even though I'm at home.
Well, it's such a pleasure to actually see these writers that I've published and communicated with by email, but now I get to see your face.
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to hearing you read.
Thank you. I'm so excited. This is just like a wonderful experience, and it's a whole new world, really, for me. I haven't done this before, and I hope it doesn't show.
It doesn't, but you've given it away now. So
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Just Down the Hall.
Well, Just Down the Hall was a story that I actually never intended to be a scary story. I was just writing a story, and when I read it aloud at another venue here in New York City, people were telling me, "Oh, write some more scary stories." And I was like, I don't know how to write a scary story. But this appears to be, and I'm kind of glad, and I'd like to work more in this sort of genre, but I'm not sure I know how, so maybe somebody will give me some feedback. I know it scares me, but I feel like I have a different reason for being scared than what the surface reason is in this story. For me, it's something like underneath it, but I don't know if everyone is hearing it that way. So I'm not quite sure what people are scared about.
Well, let's hear the story and we'll see what our audience thinks.
Yay. Okay. Just Down the Hall. Truth was, Mrs. Cole had become a little afraid of 902. Late in the evenings, she'd hear 902's footsteps slide across the tiled hallway, hesitating outside her door. "Is this my place?" her neighbor would ask. Mrs. Cole would mute the volume on her TV and hold her breath as she sat quietly in her tidy living room, waiting for the woman to shuffle away. The last few times Mrs. Cole had encountered her, 902 was wearing nothing but a gray slip that blended with the color of her skin and matched her hair. She appeared little more substantial than a shadow or a dust mote hovering in the hall. She couldn't remember when she began calling her next-door neighbor 902 instead of her real name. They had never been close. Mrs. Cole was a youthful 74, and 902 a good decade older, and a smoker. Even so, there was a time when they used to offer each other a cheery hello or have a nice day. One night, Mrs. Cole decided to hurry a bag of trash to the chute before the start of the local weather forecast. She listened at her door before opening it to make certain 902 wasn't there. She'd already kicked off her shoes for the night and hunted around for them. Where'd she left them? No matter. Just this once she'd sneak out in her bare feet. 902 surprised her in the hall. "Help," she whispered. Mrs. Cole wanted to pretend she hadn't heard the older woman's raspy plea. But what kind of person would she be to ignore someone in need, even one who wore filthy slips and reeked of cigarettes? "Please, look in my apartment," 902 beckoned. Mrs. Cole didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean? Is it a spider or something?" She was just as afraid of spiders as the next person. "Come see," sputtered 902. She wasn't wearing her teeth. "I can barely understand you," said Mrs. Cole. 902 stood there twisting a knot in the front of her slip. Mrs. Cole took a step backward toward her own apartment. "What is it?" she asked. "In there," 902 pointed to her door. "Oh, maybe we should get the super." Mrs. Cole took another step back. She could hear from her own door the weatherman announcing the lead story about a big storm on the way. To be done with her, Mrs. Cole said, all right. I'll have a quick look for you." Just inside was the kitchenette area, the same layout as Mrs. Cole's. But unlike her immaculate home, 902's sink was filled with dirty dishes. It was no surprise. Brown banana slices floated in a bowl of curdled milk. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, Mrs. Cole saw that all the furniture was coated with a layer of fine white dust like a powdered donut. Even the floors were covered. Her footsteps kicked up a little cloud and made tracks, as if in new-fallen snow. Obviously, 902 hadn't mopped for a very long time, because there were also paw prints, giving the appearance that her old Cocker Spaniel, who had died last winter, still wandered from room to room. Nothing looked disturbed or out of place, though. "Well," Mrs. Cole said. "There's a man in here." 902 reached out with a trembling hand and hooked her arm in Mrs. Cole's. "That's just silly," Mrs. Cole said, but she was whispering too now. "Up there." 902 pointed to the top of a cupboard. "See?" "I don't see anything." "I was reaching for a glass and he grabbed my hand." "Ha!" Mrs. Cole forced a laugh. "He's on the top shelf." "I don't have time for this," said Mrs. Cole. "I'm very busy." She searched 902's face for some sign the old lady was teasing, but tears ran down along the deep wrinkles around her eyes. "Please, climb up and check. Back in that corner, that's where I saw him." "Who?" "The little man." Mrs. Cole studied the cupboard. She was certain there couldn't be anyone up there. Still, she wasn't too quick to slide her hand into the dark recesses of the cabinet. What if a water bug had crawled back in there, or a mouse, or even a rat? Reason told her there was nothing, unless a very short man had folded himself in half and was just waiting to spring out. 902's fear was so strong it was catching. Quietly, Mrs. Cole dragged a chair over, took a deep breath to steady herself, and climbed up. She stretched her arms into the cupboard, groping into the dark, hoping moment by moment that nothing groped back. All she found were rusted jelly jars and an empty box of cream of wheat. "But I know he's there," pleaded 902. "He must have gone inside the wall. He does that sometimes. As soon as you're not looking, he'll come right back out," she cried. "Well, he's gone now," said Mrs. Cole. "Look in the next cabinet." "And I'll be going too." "He's gone back in the wall behind the cabinet." "It's okay. There's no one there. He'll be back." "Good night," said Mrs. Cole. "How will I be able to sleep?" Back in her own apartment, Mrs. Cole fixed herself a cup of hot chamomile and settled in to watch the news. She quietly cursed for making her miss the update on the storm. Now she had no idea what was heading her way. As she gazed about, appreciating the cleanliness of her living room, she noticed a trail of powdery white footprints across her floor. She leaned forward for a closer look. "Now, how did those get there?" she muttered. She didn't recall having any visitors. She sipped her tea and sat back, certain that tomorrow she would remember. Thank you.
That was a wonderful reading, Jeanette. And your listeners are right. It is an incredibly scary story on many levels.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And Mel has just popped that comment up as well. She says, "I don't know how you do it."
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear. I only scared myself. Maybe that's the key.
I think
Scare
so.
yourself and you'll scare others, maybe.
Yeah. There's so much great tension in there, and so many levels of mystery, so it's wonderful. Stick around. We'll
Okay.
bring you back at the end for more questions. But right now, I am going to bring our second reader onto the stage. So we have here Jakob Drud, who's coming to us all the way from Aarhus in Denmark. He's been writing for the last 20 years and has a passion for fiction that surprises, brings new insights, and makes him laugh. The fantastic genres are all that and more, so many of his stories are science fiction or fantasy or something in between. His story, Culinary Subjugation, is about to appear in issue 27, which is coming out very soon. And you can find more of his stories on his website. The link will be below in the YouTube channel. And you can find him at Jakob Drud if you're on Twitter. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and it's exciting to have a reading this far apart in the world. It's a very long way to Vancouver.
So tell us a little bit about Culinary Subjugation, and then if you can give us a quick reading, that would be lovely.
Yeah. Well, it's a story that started with that feeling that many of you probably know, that you're in a place and you feel very welcome, and yet something happens in the background that makes you feel either not wanted or maybe out of place in a certain way. I had this experience in a Chinese restaurant, which is why the story opens in a Chinese diner, where the host and the food and everything was perfect. And sometimes the host would go back into the kitchen, and they would have this thing going on with friends and the other waiters, and they would talk in Chinese, and it was obvious that no matter how good the guests felt, that was the real thing. That was what this restaurant was really about, and you could only visit, but you couldn't be a part of it. So I sat down to wonder who else would be feeling out of place in a place like that. And I thought that a food inspector would probably be less than welcome in a restaurant. And that's why the main character in this story is a food inspector. And he also works for the new alien overlords, who happen to eat a lot of different things, some of which does not make the food inspector very popular.
All right. Well, let's hear some of this.
Yeah. Culinary subjugation. Joseph Campton sent his resignation to the Preserve Council while sitting in the corner booth farthest from the counter in Hu Wong's diner. Then he packed away his Gret console and stirred the coffee, mixing low-fat milk and artificial sweetener into the brown liquid. The taste had a calming effect on his nerves, and he realized that Hu Wong had once again gotten his hands on real coffee beans. How he got them through the irradiated lands, or what place on earth was still clean enough to grow quality Java, Campton couldn't begin to guess. Hu came over to the table, smiled, and asked, "Everything all right this morning, Mr. Campton?" "The coffee is great, Hu." "Thank you, Mr. Campton. It's a pleasure to have you here." Hu bowed and left for another table. Good as the coffee was, Hu Wong was the real reason Campton came here. Hu always conveniently forgot Campton's title of food inspector, and sometimes his perfect manners even allowed Campton to forget the job himself. Today the illusion burst, despite Hu's grace. Halfway through the coffee, Campton's Gret console beeped. With rising anger, he read the council's answer. "We regret to inform you that we cannot accept your resignation. The workforce in the preserve is short-handed, and therefore we all have to bear our part of the burden. Furthermore, we forbid you to resign again. The Petonians asked specifically for your services, and it is the opinion of the council that you affront them by not accepting the honor they bestow on you." He threw the Gret console into his briefcase and got up. Hu came over, shook his hand, and collected the tip Campton had left for him. "Would you believe that?" Campton said. "The Petonians value my services?" "I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Campton." "Thank you, Hu. You're too kind." Campton left Hu's and walked outside under the domed sky. Across the street, a guy was pissing on the handle of his car. Nothing marked the vehicle as belonging to a food inspector, but people in the preserve knew it on sight by now. Clutching the handle of his briefcase a little harder, Campton crossed the street. "Take that, pit lover!" the man shouted. The words came out slurred with drink. Campton recognized him as one of the Horowitzes, a family that had made it out of Boston before the Petonians nuked the city. They had a moonshine still in the backyard that he'd inspected about a month ago. "You shouldn't be drinking your own booze," Campton said. "I found wood spirit in it." "Pits drink it, Inspector Man," Horowitz said. He sipped up and took a few wobbly steps into the middle of the street. "The Petonians drink anything. Doesn't mean you can." Campton rummaged through his pockets and found a greasy paper napkin that he used to wipe the handle. Keeping an eye on Horowitz, he unlocked the door and got in behind the wheel. "I know your car. Someday I'll blow it up." "You can't," Campton thought. "The Petonians took our explosives. Probably ate them too." The thought didn't make him feel any safer, though. With all that ethanol in his backyard still, Horowitz could easily cook up a nice firebomb. Campton rolled down the window. "Look, Horowitz, I'm just a man with a job. A man." "I read Soylent Green, Inspector, and so did you." Horowitz's middle finger waved Campton on his merry way.
That is wonderful. I'm so excited to be publishing this story.
And it was one of those stories that was exciting to write to. And you just keep throwing things at the main character in this setting. That's one of the fun things about writing sometimes.
Yes, yeah. It's and Mel has a comment here. She says she remembers reading it the first time when it came in through submissions, and marveling that you'd brought something entirely new to the alien subjugation situation. And Thomas Faring says, "Ha, excellent." So for the audience out there, if you want to read the rest of this story and find out what happens to our poor food inspector, you can pick up issue 27, which will be out in middle of July towards beginning of August. However, you can order it for free right now until the end of June. We have the digital version available for free, just in support of National Indigenous Peoples Month, which is June here in Canada, because we have Thompson Highway, who is an Indigenous writer, also in honor of Pride Month and in support of Black Lives Matter. So go ahead and order this for free before June 30th, and you'll be able to read the rest of this fabulous story. So thank you, Jakob. I'm going to bring our last reader on. Please welcome Brenda Carre. She writes long and short fiction with dark mythic twist, stories often set in locations near her home on Vancouver Island, or in the Chronicles of Ardabrun, the epic fantasy series she's currently crafting. Her short fiction has appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, as well as anthologies from Fiction, River, and Ragnarok Press. We were delighted to publish Gret, which was the first chapter of her novel of the same name, in issue 15. The Clunkety, which also features Gret, appeared in Superpowers anthology from Fiction River. And you can find out more about this fabulous character, Gret the Witch, on Brenda's website. But now I'm going to turn the mic over to Brenda. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen and Mel. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I just want to say how amazed and happy I was at the cover for this issue. It is just striking, and it really brought my character alive. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's one of my all-time favorite covers. So we were delighted to put it on the same issue with Gret, who is also a delightful character.
She's a lot of fun to write. I had promised her a book. I was busy writing another book in which she strode into the book and said, "Okay, here I am, write me." And I said, "Well, if you promise me not to take over this book, I will be quite happy to write you a book." The opportunity then came up to write her story, and she just basically wrote the story herself. So now I'm in the revision stages of her book. So it's been really exciting to be able to do that.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. So, but let's revisit this this first chapter that made me fall in love with her the first time.
Thank you. My delight to do this. My mam always told me there's 3 ways to prosper best, and all begin with L. Locations 1. No prospering's ever done by thief or witch if the job is in the wrong place or time. Lissom tongue is next. No matter how much wisdom a gal has to her, good learning don't go far if she can't talk her way out of a bad deal. Last is lightning touch. That means the effortless sliding of nimble fingers in and out of pockets without being cotched. My mam knew these L's right better than any I've met. She could charm the gold and other things right out of any feller's breeches. We'd a red lamp and physic house just outside the palace gates of the Grand Corsair of Rune. Back then, us red lamp girls was good for much more than pleasure to bodies in need. We were spies, healers, and counselors. We had the ear of high folks on Rune, and witchery. Mam passed hers on to me, no brag, just fact. She could fix the dying so they might live again. She could deal with those who needed killing. She called her laying on of hands. My dad was one who lived and loved, so she said. Word was he'd been a corsair, like so many were on Rune in my younger days. His gull-gray xebec as swift and trim as any true seaman's craft could be. I guess I got as beak of a nose in his uncompromising temper. Handsome, maybe, I can't say. Easy on the eye got him nowhere in the end. My dad was hanged after a fierce battle in a little town called Skyhaven upon the rugged Isle of Inac. Hanged from their raiders' gate along with the rest of his crew. The villagers torched his ship, the fools. No good sense of true thievery among the lot of them. Rank lubberly fisher folk, heads so far up their arses they needed to shout to be heard. Don't guess Mam grieved at his loss, not for long. She was a cool witch. For her it was business first and womanhood second. Most like I'd be just like her, save for my uncle Vongi. The day Mam died, that sodding bag of dead man's piss knocked me over my tender young pate and threw me into the orlop of a pirate ship. I'd just turned 13. So there I was, cotched and away over there on blue water. Now that was a real bad location. No silver-tongued happiness was going to save my charity. A little maid no more, I'd begun on the road to the witch I am. The captain was no true corsair. Pirates ain't. Pirates'll rut with a post if there's no goats aboard. And the goats breathe easy if there's girls. Old Isk was a barnacle-bottomed fiend with a snout like a dead salmon. His breath smelled like toenail slime. His frowsty periwig was so greasy even lice wouldn't live on it. His hands were never still. He didn't bother to untie my hands. Keeping me bound got him randy. He'd a preference for young flesh, and he had it often. He made it clear to his crew I was his property. I bought and paid for with his coin, leastways till we got to the mainland and he could get a better trade for me. I took his using of me and I festered with hate, pretended I liked it. I used that lissom tongue my mam had taught me, trying not to vomit in the doing. Knew well enough to wait my time till we made transport. The first night we come ashore, just beyond the oil and tar smell of the transport shipyards, on our way to our louse-rid bed in the attic of some noisy alehouse. We passed a stinking midden. It lay beside the hulking fish-gutting house. To my delight, I spied some fungi growing near, a clutch of whitehoods. I knew 'em. I managed to trip and fall flat on my face, my bound hands flailing, and I snaffled one into my rags without Isk seeing me. How I longed for a decent time to dry them proper, more pain in the dose. But given my hasty need, I took the ghostly cap and sprinkled the spores into Isk's claret. He drank deep, got randy, and I did what come unnatural. Later that night, when them whitehoods took effect, when that bugger was unable to do more than whimper, I thumbed out his eyeballs, and I fed them to him. I didn't bother with his tiny balls. Without his eyes, his sailing days were over.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Brenda. I just love that character. And I just love the language in your story. And few comments coming in. Mel says, I remember that a large part of your brilliant world building is drawing maps. Do you make another for each story or add to the central one as you add stories to the world?
I do both, actually. I do a lot of mapping just to kind of figure out where I am in various parts of the story. But I do have a major map. And as the books happen, I begin to add places so that I have some sense of how far places are from one to the other. I actually am writing backward in this trilogy, so I wrote the third book first, and I did the map for that book. And now I've written Gret, and I've added a lot of detail to the map. And I realized that as I write the first book, which is called Son of Ravens, I will have to add to the map as well.
Well, it's a fun way of working, and I hope the maps are published in your books when the books go live. Um, I'm going to bring, we're almost out of time. I'm going to bring everybody else back on so I can read more comments from the audience going back a little ways. Somebody wrote during Jeanette's reading that there's a cabinet behind me and I just looked over my shoulder. And that was from Be Held. Thomas Varing said, quite scary, love it. Martha Steinmetz said, brava, Jeanette. And Carol Berg said, great story, great reading. Mel said to Jakob, I think I read this one already, but I'll read it again. I remember first reading Culinary Subjugation and marveling you had brought something entirely new to the alien subjugation topic. Thomas Faring said, ha, excellent. Carol Berg said, well done. And Nancy Ludmerer, great intriguing read. Krista Wallace said, Brenda demonstrates character voice like no one else. And Mel says, I'm sure enjoying this reading, hearing read your character's voice and idioms aloud is magic. Carol Berg said, awesome story. And Stephanie Deshpand said, hi, Jeanette. So those were wonderful readings from everybody. I just love these stories so much. And such a variety, all beautifully read and beautifully written. So I'm going to finish with the question I ask everybody at the end. What are you working on next? Or what are you working on now? And we'll go from left to right. So Jeanette, what are you up to now?
Well, as usual, I'm working on getting this collection of short stories published, but I'm looking for a publisher. It's been slow going, but I feel like I just haven't worked hard enough, and I'll get it out there. And I also have a little 100-word group that we meet virtually every week and submit 100-word stories. So that keeps me focused week to week.
That is a wonderful practice, just to get that little bit of fiction out, every week.
It keeps me going, definitely. And I hope it does. I think it does with all of my co-writers.
Wow, that's great. And I am looking forward to that collection. I hope you find a publisher soon, because I'd love to read more of your stories.
Thank you so much. This has been so great.
So Jakob, what are you working on?
Right now, I'm putting the very last touches to a book for children, aged 10 to 14. That's a book in Danish, and it's part fantasy, part social realism. Actually, we have a main character who has a lot of trouble at home, but fortunately that helps him deal with some other trouble at his school, where things are not what they seem.
Oh, well, that sounds fascinating. I'm intrigued.
Well, I hope to get that one done tomorrow, actually, and send it off to a publisher, who will, hopefully bite and take it on. In Denmark, we usually don't use agents. We just send stories directly to the publisher and let them sort them out.
Well, fingers crossed. Again, good luck with that, and that's exciting to have something ready to hit send on. So
yeah.
And Brenda, I kind of know what you're working on, but you can tell our audience.
Well, I am finishing the revisions for Gret's book, and as I work on those, I really have noticed that a book is very different if you are writing it from a short story, because in many ways the book is different, very, very different from the short story. Hopefully not in voice, but there are many things that you go deeper into the world, and all of the things that are involved in writing a long piece as opposed from it being a short story. That said, I also am writing short stories in the world. There's an assassin who has a minor, well, actually quite a major part in Gret's book that now has a world of her own. And so I spent a month writing her short story, which will be submitted to a market. And I have a story coming out in August called Giggle Bark Tea, which is, it's in an anthology called The Wild Hunt, which is published by Blackbird Press. And it deals with a vintage selkie, I guess you would call her. She's a crone, but she's also a selkie, and she has a very grumpy neighbor who they come to terms because they have to oust the Wild Hunt, which is inflicting their land. And it's set in my neighborhood, but it's set in the mythic part of my neighborhood. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Oh wow, that sounds fabulous. I'm looking forward to all those things. So, thank you everybody for joining us this morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world, and have a wonderful weekend. And to our audience, we will see you again next week at the same time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.